you. Today, I'll be talking about college students. But before I do that, I want you all to take a minute and think about what comes to mind when you picture a typical college student. You probably think of somebody between the ages of 18 and 22 who's freshly out of high school. You might think of somebody who studies a lot and pulls all-nighters. You might think of somebody who goes to parties or goes out with friends. When we think of college students, we definitely think about stress. They worry about their grades, they worry about homework and friends and work. But when you think about college students, do you think about them worrying about food? That's what I learned 2 years ago when I interviewed students for my master's project. It was in a small, windowless office tucked away on the edge of campus where I heard what the true college experience was like. One student I talked to told me how she manages her budget. She would get paid every 2 weeks, and she'd pay off all of her bills first: rent, tuition, car payment, and then whatever is left over she would use for food. And that typically came out to be about $25 to $30 every 2 weeks. And once that runs out, it's gone. This student was skipping meals. She told me how difficult it was to take her medication because she didn't have enough to eat at times. And she talked about how embarrassing it is when her stomach would growl in class. She, like many other students, would attend events on campus in order to get free food to help make ends meet. Another student I spoke with was an international student. She told me how hard it was to get foods that fit her cultural preferences. If she wanted those foods, she had to take the train 40 minutes down University Avenue to get to the Asian market, and once there, she could only get as much food as she could carry home on her 40-minute train ride back. This student, I remember her telling me how she used to sit still in her apartment on days when she didn't have many activities in order to conserve energy, and she was also skipping meals. International students have added barriers. Not only is it more expensive for them to come to the university, to come to America, but they don't get the same financial aid and loans as domestic students. And they also don't get any federal assistance programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. I so often hear the stereotype too that college students don't know how to manage their money, but that's not what I heard. I talked to many students who were working 2, sometimes 3 jobs during the year while going to school just to cover their costs, and they were still coming up short. I remember one student telling me how she worked up to 60 hours a week in the summer in order to make her college payments. This student talked about how this affected her mental health and how at times she felt like she had virtually no social life. Let's see. Students also talked about the physical consequences of hunger. They talked about having headaches and feeling dizzy and feeling fatigued and irritable, which we call hangry, but they were feeling this every day. And they talked about how difficult it was to focus in class and focus on their assignments when they were worried about where their next meal would come from. And these are not just the stories of a few students. Here at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, nearly 1 in 5 students worries that their food will run out before they can buy more, and 1 in 10 students actually experiences food shortages. So why is this happening? More and more people are enrolled in higher education today than ever before. It's so necessary to have a 4-year degree to even earn somewhat of a decent living wage. So with that comes a much more diverse student population. That means we have more non-traditional students. So those are students that aren't just out of high school with their parents supporting them. These are student parents themselves, or these are students who have been in the workforce and are returning back to college. These are also first-generation students, which means they're the first in their family to get a 4-year degree. Also, in addition to the changing demographic, there's a changing financial landscape. So since 1970, the cost of tuition has increased 2,551%, while the Minnesota per capita income has only doubled in that time in unadjusted dollars. At the same time, the purchasing power of the Pell Grant, which is our largest federal aid program, is declining. So students are having to pay more today with less support than ever before. I so often hear from the generation ahead of me how they could work in the summer and pay for a full year of school. And why aren't college students working their way through college anymore? To put that into perspective, a college student today would have to work 61 hours per week for 52 weeks if they're working the state minimum wage at $9 an hour. to pay for just 9 months of study and living at a public 4-year institution. So what do we do about this? Well, when you think about food insecurity, the first thing that comes to mind is food. And that's what colleges are doing. They're opening up campus food pantries all across the nation. This is not a unique problem just to the Twin Cities. So in 2011, there were 15 college campus food pantries, and today there are over 700. And so that's what we did here at the university. When I was a graduate student, along with the help of other students, we opened TEDxUMN. So on our first day, we thought that we would maybe serve around 400 students over the course of 3 days. And instead, we saw 500 students show up on day 1, and we cleared out of 3,000 pounds of food. So then we realized we needed a little bit more. So at our second food pantry, we served just under 1,000 students and distributed 6,000 pounds of food. Now our campus food pantry is open once per month in our student union. And I would say it's not what you would typically think of when you think of a food pantry. The Nutritious You provides mostly fresh and healthy food and other staple ingredients. So half of our order by weight each month is fresh produce. As you can see in here, that's things like potatoes and onions and carrots, and we have apples, pears, and oranges. And then our other items are like beans and rice, tuna, and we have culturally appropriate foods like fufu, lentils, and rice noodles. And we know that this works. We evaluate it. And we see that students who visit the food pantry more frequently report lower rates of food insecurity. So that's a great start, but we can't stop there. So I work in the field of public health, which means we like to think upstream. We like to think as preventatively as possible. So public health interventions usually occur on a spectrum of prevention. I like to think of it as occurring along like points on a river. So the downstream interventions are the crisis response program. So that is like the Nutritious You Food Pantry or the Swipe Out Hunger program, which students with meal plans can donate extra meals and we give them to students who are hungry. So these are crisis response. They help the student once they've already run out of food and once they're already hungry. Moving slightly upstream, we have the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which used to be called food stamps. And this is a program that provides cash assistance to individuals to help supplement their grocery budget. And side note, we know that college students are eligible for SNAP, and we're working really hard to get as many eligible students enrolled as possible. This is slightly upstream because if you give students money, then hopefully they can purchase their groceries in the month and don't need to use the food pantry or these other emergency programs. But how do we think even further upstream? To do that, we have to think about the problem a little bit differently. We have to try to understand what the underlying causes are of it. What is contributing to this problem that is causing students to be hungry? So we'll go back to the student stories that I told you about earlier. Many of the students talked about the financial struggles that they face. You heard that students were working 2, 3 jobs at a time and were still coming up short. So now when we think about food insecurity as a financial issue, we can move beyond those solutions just as obvious as providing food, and we can think about how we can influence a student's budget so that they have enough money to eat and they don't run out of food. So the high cost of housing was one thing that many students talked about. So some students were paying $600 to $700 a month to share a room, and some students pay up to $1,000 a month. So next to tuition, this is the biggest chunk of money that they're spending each and every month. So if we can address the high cost of housing, then maybe the students would have more money to spend on groceries each month. Any way that we can influence how much money is coming in for the student or how much money they're spending out will have an impact on food insecurity. So what does it mean to address the high cost of housing? There's a couple different things that we can do. You can have conversations about having a student-focused affordable housing policy that is put into place so that students' needs are being considered as development happens around campus. It could be as simple as controlling rent rates so that they don't increase so dramatically year to year. Any way that we can put downward pressure on the housing market can influence how much money students would have for groceries then. So for example, so many students told me how they feel the pressure to sign their leases for their sophomore year living situation, like within the first few months of freshman year. I had one student who signed her lease where she was gonna live as a sophomore in September of her first year, so knowing her soon-to-be roommates for less than a month. So another solution that we can think of is listing all of the prices of all the apartments in one place and what all the hidden costs might be and what they'll get for that so that students can make educated decisions about where to live and find a place that fits their needs. So addressing the high cost of housing is just one unique way of addressing the issue of food insecurity. Complex problems like these require complex solutions. In order to address food insecurity on campus, we need a multi-pronged, coordinated approach that addresses all of the issues along the spectrum of prevention. So that means it is okay to have emergency crisis response programs like a food pantry or like our Swipe Out Hunger program because students are hungry and they're in need at this time. But it also means that we want to consider what is contributing to this problem of hunger. What is happening further upstream and how can we intervene there in order to prevent the need for a student to have to use these emergency programs? So I challenge you all, the next time that you have a problem, whether it be personal or work-related, big or small, take a public health approach to addressing it. And that means think just beyond the first obvious solution that comes to mind. You can look at the problem from a different angle, ask more questions, try to understand what those underlying factors are that are causing the problem, and think about how you can address your problem further upstream in order to prevent it. And I can assure you, once you do that, you will come up with a much more impactful solution. Thank you.